Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Tuesday Night Hustle. Waiver wire, trades, roster management. To win in fantasy football, you must remember one simple rule. Never get out-hustled. It's the Tuesday Night Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland.
Hey-o! Tuesday night! The beers are cracked. The kids are in bed. And you know it's time to hustle, folks. What's going on out there in fantasy land? It's Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined as always by the analytical assassin, Dwayne McFarland. Dwayne, what's going on down there in Texas, man? Some crazy weather recently. You all right?
Yeah. Well, mainly it's just not hot. Like, we don't care about tornadoes and wind. We're like, that's fine. We're just glad that it's not already 102. It was like 82 degrees today. So it's, well, and you know, Drake, the snakes are out. I keep sending, you all the pictures of all the snakes I'm killing in my yard. I guess I shouldn't say I'm killing them. We could get like a call from PETA, but anyway.
Well, welcome, everybody. This is the Tuesday Night Hustle. We are a proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network with ffchamps.com. You can check out the old hashtag there at hashtag FTFPodNet, and that's where you'll get the hookup to all the dozen or so shows that are part of the FullTimeFantasy.com network. You can read our work over at FightingChanceFantasy.com, and of course follow us on Twitter at DrakeFantasy and at Dwayne McFarland. And if you go over to that site, you're going to find a fantastic article or two that Dwayne just did about early season ADP, and then another article about mock drafting and knowing some tiers and all that. We'll get into that later in the show. But what we want to do tonight, and it's a really special show, is talk a little bit about the Pittsburgh Steelers, because we have a guest on who is as plugged into the Steelers as you'll find, and that's Matt Williamson. You can follow him at Williamson NFL. He's a former NFL scout, ESPN analyst, hosts the Locked On NFL podcast. You fantasy guys out there in the Dynasty world might know him from the Fantasy Blueprint podcast with Ryan McDowell. So we're going to have him on in a second. We're going to go over some of the questions that we have about the Pittsburgh Steelers, their wide receivers. Can Big Ben keep up his hot streak? They throw the ball more than anybody in the league. So we'll go over that with him. And Dwayne, you did this article and you listed 10 players in fantasy football who you think currently are being undervalued at their ADP. 3 of those 10 are Pittsburgh Steelers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thus we have Matt on because, and every year it's a little bit different. This year it is the Steelers, and it's, you've got Antonio Brown moving on. So you've got 160 plus targets gone. You've got the offense that passed the ball 67% of the attempts last year, which is the most in the league. I don't know what Matt says, but it feels like Ben Roethlisberger is really running this offense, not the offensive coordinator. So it'll be interesting to hear more about that. But I think it's a fantasy landscape that people really need to understand. And a lot of it comes down to where you can get some of these guys also. So, guys like James Washington, Vance McDonald aren't costing a ton in the drafts right now. And those are guys that if the news heats up around them, their ADP is going to rise, throughout the summer. So I see Vance McDonald being a guy that, will close in on Evan Ingram and Hunter Henry. James Washington could easily jump up in the tier, with like a Mike Williams, those sorts of guys. But before we jump into that, I would like to pitch it over to Matt. Matt's out at the Pittsburgh Steelers, minicamp. Today was day 1. So I know he's probably, picking up new nuggets all the time. Matt, what are your thoughts just around this pecking order period for the Steelers passing offense?
Yeah, it's great to be on with you too. And Dwayne, thanks again for coming on Locked On NFL last week. You got rave reviews. That was a blast. Seems like this could be the beginning of a wonderful friendship between 2 great podcasts. And yeah, I think they are a really interesting team, and I am extremely close to them. And I do think there is certainly fantasy gold to be mined. But the big picture to me is what needs to change with this offense. I have a little bit of concern about is that maybe as much as any offense in the league, and along with the McCarthy Packers, this was a very execution-based offense. Our checkers are better than yours. We don't have to scheme the heck out of things to get people open. I can rely on Bell and Brown and Juju, and when McDonald's your 4th or 5th guy on the pecking order, things are pretty good. And I'm not being critical of Ben or the staff or anything for that, because frankly, it worked extremely well. And now I think it's imperative, honestly, for them to become a little more scheme-driven, route combinations and concepts to open guys up, even if it's a Jalen Samuels or Eli Rogers or Switzer. But in particular, the guy you mentioned, and that's Vance McDonald. I do very much sense a huge breakout season for him. And it's funny because after practice, the Steelers give us one player to sit down and chat with every day. And last week, Vance sat right next to me. We're sitting there having a good conversation. And I turned to him and I'm like, do you realize that the metrics and all the analytics out there really show that tight ends don't really hit their peak until about 27, 28 years old? And he's like, wow, I didn't know that. I just turned 28 and I'm feeling the best I ever have, and it's like, yeah. And I've run into him in the cafeteria a couple times since. And he said things along the lines of, it's amazing. I'm a much better player now than I was in my Niners day when I was, relying more on my size and speed and physicality. And tight ends take a while. And I think he's really hitting those prime years.
So you see, I think everybody agrees, and you tell us if this is wrong. I think, Juju is obviously going to be the number one,
Sure.
But where your head's at right now is that Vance McDonald could easily be the two. Last year, he averaged he was getting 10% of the target share per game on a per game basis. He played 15 games. So he nearly played all of the games. Mm-hmm. And then you had, Jesse James, who was there, who was also getting a similar split to that. So do you see that as being something where, hey, McDonald probably usurps, what was left by Jesse James and takes on a little bit of what Antonio Brown had, or how do you see that playing out?
Well, one thing I can tell you for sure is if you recall, the Steelers traded for McDonald very late in the process, that he kind of picked them up and it took him a while to assimilate with the team. He was fighting some injuries early on. It wasn't like he didn't know what he was doing, but they didn't really know, can he play when he's 70%, 80%, 90%? They just didn't know the player that well yet. I mean, he was new. And it made me crazy, and I do blame the Steelers a little for this, that James would eat into his snap count at all, because to me, they're not close to the same talent. I mean, losing James for a comp pick is a blessing for the Steelers to me, and it's going to open up McDonald to get more playing time. I mean, the fact that they split time at all was ludicrous to me. I mean, especially later in the year, McDonald's just a much, much better player. He's more physical. He's a better blocker. He's flat out fast. He's nasty with the ball in his hands. I don't know that I'd go so far as to, stand on the table and say he's going to have the second most receptions on the team. But I think he's the second most important receiver.
Mm. Okay.
Now,
go ahead, Drake.
The Steelers went out and not only did they sign Dante Moncrief in the offseason away from the Jaguars, but they drafted Deontay Johnson, who folks in dynasty leagues are very excited about. Between those two guys, is there a competition for that other wide receiver spot? And are those two the guys fighting for it, or is Eli Rogers going to get some work in the slot? Who's kind of that other guy we're looking for in the Steelers wide receiver group?
I think how it will shake out, and obviously there's a ton of practice in camp and preseason and hopefully no injuries, that like most teams, 3 receiver sets is their most played, personnel groupings. I think you'll see Connor, McDonald, Juju in the slot, Moncrief and James Washington as the outside guys. And that brings a lot of, as a 5-some goes in terms of skill position players, that's a pretty physical group. I mean, if Juju's your little guy, he is a thick, strong dude, and Moncrief has size, and Washington's well built. Connor and McDonald are both very physical for their respective positions with a really good O-line. I think that's the 5-some you'll see the most, with Johnson kind of waiting in the wings. I think one of the beauties of Johnson is when you look at their receiving core pre-draft, Moncrief and Washington were pure outside guys. Juju has proven to do everything. We know that. He's at that point of his career, where Rogers and Switzer were pure slots. So I think they were looking for someone, and he keeps getting compared to Antonio Brown because he was a MAC player, but somebody at least in that mold that can line up in the slot, can move all over the formation. So I think Johnson will fit that mold, as will Juju. And I think the beauty of Johnson early in his career is he is by far the leading candidate to be the top punt returner, which at least gets you a helmet on game day. So my hunch is he'll be the 4 unless he blows someone's doors off. And that could happen. I mean, I expect him to have a good preseason, and maybe he pushes for playing time. But my hunch is he's the 4, and those 3 a little bit more established guys, including Washington, are the guys that gets the most snaps.
Matt, so I was reading, I've read a lot about, the Steelers, obviously getting some of it just getting ready for this show, but, me studying these teams. And one of the things that I noticed, I've heard several quotes around is that in the Steelers offense, they expect all the receivers to know every position, and more offenses are also getting like that. You hear that with the Rams and some of these other teams as well. But there was also some speculation that last year why James Washington was so, streaky as far as his playing time. There's been a little bit of chatter in the community that he couldn't learn the playbook. He couldn't absorb, terminology and stuff like that. Is that something that you have heard, or do you see something else with James Washington that might have been, what held him back a little bit? And part of my argument as well, when you're on a team with Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster, and then you've got 2 tight ends and a running game, it's like, I don't know how much there is left for everybody else, but just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, and I think you basically nailed it, but to take it a step further, I mean, he was very impressive in all the camps, training camp practices, preseason. You see big play ability, really great work contorting his body, getting downfield, physicality. But I remember talking to someone in the organization saying, boy, you guys got one in Washington. And he said to me, yeah, but it'll be 2019. And that's not an implication at all that he couldn't learn the playbook. It was just adjusting to, where he came from in a wide open Big 12 was night and day different. I mean, the being open in there is much different than being open in the AFC North. And he subsequently lost 10 to 15 pounds this past offseason because he said he wanted to be a little quicker out of his breaks to gain just that little bit more separation. But he'll even be the first to admit, he'll tell you, hey, when we would come to the line of scrimmage and do all the hand signals and the checks, I wasn't real sure yet, and I don't hold that against him at all. I mean, it was a complex offense, a lot of veterans that knew each other extremely well, a lot of familiarity. And he was a new guy on the block, and they were a contender and weren't going to, not quote, waste their time, but they're not thinking about tomorrow. They're trying to get the best guys out there to win now. And they had good dudes to do it. So I think they're still extremely high on him. He shows up every day. You're there in practice. If you sat there and watched any given practice, you would say, why isn't he on the field all the time and 80 catch guy? Well, that might be coming, but it just was a transition year for him.
Okay. Yeah, because he's a guy that I am. You talked about pounding the table earlier, and Drake's heard it. Drake's probably sick of hearing the name James Washington by now, but he's a guy we've actually talked about a lot. I see him as a guy, they spent a decent pick on him last year and a second rounder. Like you said, it's an offense that changes things a lot at the line of scrimmage. So I don't know that bothers me so much that I think a lot of rookies struggle to pick that kind of stuff up. You're dealing with a faster game, higher competition, your technique and all those things matter so much more. You're working on those things, and then you're trying to absorb a playbook and learn all these adjustments at the line of scrimmage. I think some of that just comes with time. I guess, from a fantasy perspective, and not to put you on the spot that you have to pick one, but for me, if I'm going to put a chip on somebody in the 8th, 9th round, which is where you can get him now, sometimes in the 10th round of a fantasy draft, I think that's a value. And I am putting a chip on him ahead of Moncrief. Not that I hate Moncrief, but I do feel that Moncrief has played with Andrew Luck. He's played with, on some good teams, and he's never quite broken out. So the guy that I favor is the guy that they drafted. And so I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mostly agree, but I also worry from fantasy that those two are going to vulture each other back and forth all year, because maybe I'm a little higher on Moncrief than you are, because I thought his best year watching him was last year. Just the offense was so bad in Jacksonville and the quarterback play was so bad. He's only 25 years old. I know the Steelers are quite happy to get him. They thought they got a bargain. He's been very inconsistent through his career. But even like Sammy Coates and to some degree Martavis Bryant, they really want a big, fast, outside the numbers dude who can stretch the field. And I think Moncrief at a minimum is that right now, where Washington has to prove it. I could see Moncrief being ahead of Washington on opening day and then gradually losing, but I don't know that one's going to blow the other out of the water. So that's what worries me for fantasy. I mean, in Dynasty, I've scooped up Washington left and right when his stock was, quote, down a little. But I don't know that he's going to catch 80 this year. You know what I mean? Just because Moncrief's a pretty decent player. One more Washington note I just want to throw out to you guys was he was one of the guys who sat down with us, too, this past week or so. And I didn't realize this, but he said throughout OTAs and minicamp last year, his rookie season, he's like, I don't think I caught one ball from Ben Roethlisberger. You know what I mean? Ben didn't participate in OTAs that much, and when he did, it was with AB and Juju. And Washington's big role was you and Mason Rudolph get each other comfortable in this new city, and you know each other from your college days. So he said, I don't think I caught my first pass from Ben Roethlisberger until training camp.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody knows that. I mean, it's kind of an interesting tidbit.
So right now, here's the way I have it. I've got 27% of the targets going to Juju. I've got, and I'm with you. I'm not trying to be overly, I've got James Washington at 15%, right? But I think he has upside from there. But I may be too low on Moncrief. Now I've got Juju and Vance both at 15, and then I've got Dante Moncrief at 10%. And I think what I'm hearing from you is, Washington and Moncrief may be a little closer together. I mean, and I always leave myself room. I leave myself room in these things. So, I mean, I've still got like 8%. I haven't projected. I never like to project, 100% because injuries and everything.
Right.
So, I think what I'm hearing from you is, you feel that Washington and Moncrief could be closer together than, one at 15 and one at 10.
Yeah, but I don't feel super comfortable saying that in the middle of June. I mean, I think
that's fair.
That's going to be a quote camp battle to be the number 2, but the reality is whoever the 3 is going to play almost as many snaps anyway. You know what I mean?
No matter how often does Ben look at him? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that all of us media guys are going to be saying, boy, Moncrief and Washington is a great camp battle to be the opposite of Juju. And then when it's all said and done, they'll probably play about the equal snaps throughout the year because they play so many 3 receiver sets or someone takes a breather, that they might be very equal.
Okay. Fair.
Shifting over
That's my early hunch.
Matt, let's shift over to the backfield. And, of course, we're talking to Matt Williamson from the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow him at Williamson NFL. If you look at the full-time fantasy ADP, which you can find over at FFWC, it's they've got James Conner with an ADP of 13. So he's going at the end of the first round, start of the second round. So if you're on that hook, you got a good chance of getting James Conner. There's been a lot of buzz, though, this offseason about Jalen Samuels, the converted tight end, and Benny Snell, the rookie they just brought in. Is James Conner entrenched as that every down back, or have you seen the Steelers want to get Samuels on the field more, want to play more 2 running back sets? Does Snell have a chance to come in there and sniff some carries? What are we looking at here in the Steelers' backfield?
This is how I see it, again, and it's subject to change, is Tomlin's history is very robust of feeding one guy. And that's easy to do when it's Lev Bell in 2016 and he's the best player in the league. But really, even going back to Willie Parker, I mean, Coach Tomlin feeds his horse. And I have some concerns about Conner's durability, his fumbling. His fumbling is a problem. But I think he's improving as a receiver. He's the best one in protection by far. That I think he's clearly the bell cow behind what might be the best offensive line in the league. So while I don't think he's as special of a player as some of the guys going in his neighborhood, Joe Mixon. Like Joe Mixon's a more talented guy than James Conner. I think if you're getting Conner at the turn at the end of round 1, you're going to be extremely happy. In a productive offense, I think he gets very much the workload. Because I look at Jalen Samuels, and I don't think he's a running back. I mean, he's going to go to the RB room every day, but you watch him as a runner, I think he's very pedestrian. I think his role is going to be a gadget guy, a pass catcher type. The Steelers drafted Dre Archer a couple of years ago, and Haley before that drafted Dexter McCluster as these like combo type guys. And Samuel's way bigger than them, but I think in the end, that's what he is. And it's funny, like we sat down with him last year in his rookie season. He's sitting there chatting with us in minicamp, and he's like, I've never pass blocked in my life. You know, that if NC State was throwing the ball, I was going out on a route because I'm damn good at it, and I have no clue what I'm doing in pass protection. So if he's on the field, he has a long way to go. I mean, that's a hard thing to put that guy on the field if he can't protect, and everyone knows it, and you know he's running a route, and he's not Christian McCaffrey is a route runner. I mean, he never will be. But he is a weapon in the passing game, but I think he's a changeup, and I think Snell will be the true handcuff.
Well, that's good information. Do you have any?
I mean, I haven't even seen him yet break a tackle yet, but I mean, I think that's what he was drafted to do.
Any concerns with Mike Munchak moving on to Denver and how that'll impact this offensive line? Uh-oh. Did we freeze up here on you guys?
I can hear you. Drake, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We may have lost Matt for a minute.
We may have lost Mr. Williamson.
Yeah, I think he looks frozen.
But some great information he was giving us there. That was Matt Williamson from the Locked On NFL podcast, big-time Steelers insider. What did you glean from what he said? Anything kind of new and outstanding? I thought when he said that Moncrief is going to get the nod over Deontay Johnson, that kind of surprised me. But maybe it shouldn't, because you're bringing in a veteran, a guy who's played in multiple NFL systems, and why wouldn't he have that job over kind of an unproven small school rookie?
Yeah, that's what I expected, actually, is what he said. I'm still keeping Moncrief a little lower in my mind because I do believe that it's like Matt said. He is a big, strong, fast guy, and they like having those. So I think he's going to be there to stretch the field, and he's the best guy on the team, to play that role. Why I continue to be intrigued, by James Washington is there's an opportunity for him to grow into Antonio Brown's route tree and being the guy that Ben likes in more situations. Because as much as, I used to be a Moncrief fan when he first came out, and then I kind of have waned on him, just because as time goes on. So it's one of those deals where I don't know that I'll change my rankings a lot based on, the information. But I think that it's like he said, it's something we're just going to have to continue to monitor, through the preseason. So there are a lot of things, in preseason that aren't really the things you should be focused on in fantasy football. But I think for this team, there's going to be plenty, because I want to see, we want to make sure, is it pretty much those three coming out, right, in the first series of games, depending on whichever games the Steelers decide to use to really polish up. And then you do want to see, what kind of route combinations are these guys running? What type of stuff is Washington doing, whether he's getting the ball or not, versus what Moncrief is doing. Is Moncrief truly being used as the field stretcher, or does it look like they're both running a lot of similar routes, right? And that could indicate, okay, it is going to be more of a split between these two. The cool thing with Moncrief right now, though, Brian, is that even if you draft like James Washington in the 9th or 10th round, if you wanted to, you can turn around and throw a dart at Moncrief in the 14th or 15th. Mm-hmm. So that may be the smart move, right? I mean, you're in a passing offense that's going to, we know throw the ball a lot. They've got a good quarterback, and they're in a division where, you have a lot of high scoring games. So I think throwing a dart at both of those players may be the biggest thing that I may have just came away with.
I want to go back to something you were saying earlier today on Twitter. Rehash this for our audience. It's not about when you're reading off-season tweet. There he is. We got Matt back. But Dwayne, let me finish this thought. It's not about when somebody says, hey, this player XYZ is in the best shape of his life. It's about where they're playing. If they say, hey, this guy's getting first-team reps, that's what you should take away from the news blurb, not, hey, blah, blah, blah. And we could get Matt to talk about this because he's at these camps.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, it's just from doing this for a long time. And I remember I used to get, I think, as a younger fantasy player and as a younger, I don't know if I would call myself an analyst because I'm not an analyst anywhere, but I do analyze this information and I have for a long time. What I've learned is, there are certain kind of comments I'm paying less attention to. Like I listen to them and it's part of the story. You're building it up, but it's not what I'm going to base whether or not I'm going to change a projection or not. So I'm not as worried about, oh, he looks really fast, or, this guy's so big, or this guy, if I hear a beat writer say, oh, he's going to be really good. I'm looking for more substance. What I'm looking for is he's lining up in the slot with the first team. And then I'm looking to see, are all the other receivers healthy, right? Because at this time of year, they'll just hold, a lot of times they'll hold some of the veterans and stuff out, if they're not feeling well. So, you want to check those things. But then it's like Geronimo Allison, right? in the Packers, mini camp, not actually their OTAs. Allison was lining up every day in the slot, so, and he's a guy that we know Aaron Rodgers has a history with. I care more about that than hearing, oh, Geronimo Allison looks like he's healed from his injury and he looks fast. Yeah, that's important. I want to hear it, but I'm not going to really change much based off of that information. Right. Yeah. So like for me, when I hear something, you tell me what you think about this, Matt, and then I know we're going to, let you pop off. Got one more question for you after this, but so when I will pay a little more attention to that kind of news is like, say, for example, what I heard about N'Keal Harry, earlier this week. Stephon Gilmore is lining up on him every play, and there's 2 or 3 reporters saying N'Keal Harry can't get open. That for me matters because one, I have context of reading things from guys that, I really, respect as far as scouting goes, like a Matt Waldman, Jamie Moyer. I mean, there's several guys that I read their stuff and they talked about pre-draft. Hey, one thing to watch with this guy is, he struggles to get off the line. He's great run after catch, but he is not really good at creating separation. Now, I also have to take into context Stephon Gilmore is probably a top 10 corner in the league. So how much do I expect a rookie to be good, in that situation? But to me, that's a little more telling. But what I don't go for is when I just hear, well, N'Keal Harry looked terrible today, or N'Keal Harry looked great today. If I get the context that Stephon Gilmore, that's my favorite, and it's posted on Twitter. Look at this catch, against no one. It's awesome. So, hey, oh, yeah, it was like the one. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. All right, so one more question for you. And this one is basically it's kind of wide open for you. Anything else, just on the Steelers? And again, it's like you said earlier, this is going to be a work in progress. We're going to learn a lot more as things go along. But anything that you think, hey, this is something you really need, to be watching. This is a key. You kind of started us off with some I thought really good notes around how this may need to be more schematic versus just execution because you lose such a tough cover in Antonio Brown who can make execution much easier. And so that was, I thought, a really great tidbit on your part. Anything else? Mm. Oh, come on, Matt. Every offense should pass 70% of the time. That's the data is so clear in that. It 100% says that without any doubt. All right, man. Well, hey, we really, really appreciate you hopping on with us, talking Steelers, super important team. at Matt Williamson, at Williamson NFL. Right, you guys can follow him on Twitter. Matt, real quick before you jump off, tell everybody else again where they can find you. Absolutely. You guys got to do that. So, again, appreciate you being on, and hopefully we'll have you back as camp gets closer. We'll talk some more Steelers. All right.
Nothing wrong with that. Getting a little insider information from a guy like Matt Williamson. Hey, you did a great job on his podcast the other day, man. I listened to that, the Lockdown NFL podcast. That was really, like, as I say, the NFL information meat sandwich, man. You guys dropped the hammer breaking down the Buccaneers and the Titans. So go check that out if you really want to get some inside info on those teams. Right now, we're going to switch gears, and we're going to go over to fightingchancefantasy.com, and we're going to talk about an article that Dwayne did talking about early season ADP. Now, we don't know when you were going to draft. Everybody in every league is different, okay? Some people, like my big leagues, all draft Labor Day weekend. But you might have friends that can come to town certain weeks. You're drinking beers early in August, and you're having your draft then. So you need to take advantage of the current news cycle. And Dwayne has done an excellent job with this article over at Fighting Chance about guys he thinks are a little mispriced and you can get for a deal right now. And we're going to run through those guys. Number one, and this is going to be a little controversial, but hey, it's the news. It is what it is. And it's Tyreek Hill. All right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. So, with Tyreek Hill, and again, great way to kind of tee it up, Drake, from the beginning. We don't know when everybody's drafting, so this is as of, today. And just, in full disclosure, I'm going to draft 15 to 20 teams. So if you're going to be someone that's going to play in a lot of drafts, or you're going to be, like a mid-stakes, high-stakes player, and you've got a bankroll set aside for that, whatever the case may be, I try to diversify my portfolio. So right now is the time to buy on Tyreek Hill. And I believe there's a lot of ways you can build him into your roster construction, taking him in the 6th round, which is where he's going. Now, I did see him pop up to the 3rd round in a mid-stakes draft that just happened this past weekend.
Really?
Yeah, so the news around the DA saying that the case is not an ongoing investigation. That doesn't mean that he's in the clear. The Chiefs haven't tried to reinstate him yet. So once they do, we'll find out what's the league going to do, if they're going to put him on the exempt list or how they're going to handle it. And so there will be another probably swirl around. I would say right now Tyreek Hill's creeping up. But at the end of the day, this is all about upside. If I can get him in the 6th round in the same place that I got to take a Mike Williams, the same place, and it's not that I don't like Mike Williams, but if I get Tyreek Hill instead of Mike Williams, and then I can turn around in the 9th round and take a guy like Geronimo Allison, who I think, as of right now, gives me probably the same production as Mike Williams. Mm-hmm. There are ways to build a strategy to let yourself take a swing on a guy like Tyreek Hill. So, because here's what's going to happen. If for some reason the NFL just decides he's suspended for 4 games, or, hey, they may decide he can't, and I doubt this, but who knows, they could decide he's not going to be suspended at all. No matter what that news is, once people find out Tyreek Hill is going to play some amount of football, his price is going to go up. And if you really think about it, like, now's the time to take advantage of it and build it into your roster construction. Now, that means that you can't just swing everywhere for upside later in your draft. You need to balance things out and take a guy like Allison. But for me, this is the perfect time to take advantage of a news cycle. And he could completely whiff and he could miss. So this is also about people's risk tolerance and how many teams they're going to draft. Like you said, if they're going to draft one team and it happens to be an early summer draft, fine, don't draft Tyreek Hill. I think there's a way that you can still do it. But if you're a risk-averse person, that's okay. We got other guys for you here on the list.
Let me throw one more thing on Tyreek Hill at you. Let's say he gets suspended 4 games. So we know that comes out because it always happens. And
he'll be worth a 4th-round pick.
And actually, missing 4 games. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, because the way I look at that is I look at what he's going to give me per game when he's back, and then I subtract what I think I'm going to get with his replacement player for those 4 games. So it's not near as much as what people think. If, let's say, I think Tyreek Hill is going to score, 15 points, 20 points a game. Mm-hmm. If I can find a replacement player for him for the first 4 weeks that can score me 10 to 12, then I'm losing 7 points a game if I've got him projected at 20 points a game, right? I'm using 7, which I won't. I'm going to have him around, he'd be around 15 points a game. But you're only losing 3 to 4 points a game for 4 weeks. That's 20 points, right? In your projection model, so you got to think about, that's why roster construction is so important. People let their emotions get in the way of, I can't take this guy because he's going to miss the 4 games. No, think about it differently. If I take this guy, what can be my strategy to replace him for those first 4 games? And then what does my final outcome look like? Because down the stretch, you just got a player that should have been drafted in the second round of fantasy drafts.
Now, let's say you're a player out there and you do want to get into some drafts. You can go over to fulltimefantasy.com. They've got Beat the Expert leagues. They've got best ball leagues. They've got high stakes leagues that you can get into for as low as $35. Go over there and check them out at fulltimefantasy.com. They are the guys who put together this podcast network for us, so we like to give them a couple of plugs here during the show. Let's keep rolling here with Dwayne's list of guys he thinks are a little undervalued. And coming in at number 2 is Todd Gurley. This is a guy who, at the end of every first round in America this year, some guy's going to be biting his teeth. He's going to go, oh my God, do I want to take this guy? Do I got a set of balls? I think he's going to be good. I think the guys who are going to take Todd Gurley are maybe the guys who don't pay enough attention and they just don't care. They just say, you know what? I know Todd Gurley's good. He's got a little knee issue, whatever. And at the end of the day, those guys end up winning championships too. You don't have to be the smartest guy. Sometimes you just have to be the luckiest guy. So how lucky do you think we're going to get with Todd Gurley if you see him slipping now to the 3rd round possibly?
Yeah, I've seen him now in multiple mid-stake drafts, so drafts that cost between $300 and $500 a piece. And again, these are drafts that are going on, early on. So a lot of times you're dealing, and I kind of lay this out at the beginning of this article. The advantage of drafting early like this is you could take advantage of some of these early news cycles and certain components of information that people haven't caught up on. Mm-hmm. The downside of it is you are drafting, with guys that are probably drafting 15 to 20 teams. So part of what I think is happening with Gurley is some of these guys have probably drafted him enough that they're now divesting from him. And in the early season ADP stuff, it's pushing him down. And it's like you said, I believe that as the season becomes, comes back around, gets closer, you're going to see more folks pay less attention, and they're going to move Todd Gurley back up to where then you're going to have to take him at 110, 111, 112, maybe a late second. An early second. I could be wrong about that, but for me right now, now's the time for me that I want to take Gurley. Because once you get past the middle of the second round, I can make a case for Gurley to be the guy I want, even with me cutting 20% to 25% off of his production last year. And so the price becomes right. Later in the summer, what's going to happen is he's going to be going with other guys that probably you're going to project or whoever's projections you're using, they're going to have Todd Gurley and them close. And then you're going to have a coin flip over an injury. Do I want to take the guy that could have a knee problem or the guy that doesn't? Knowing that they're also going to manage his snaps. And Darrell Henderson is going to take receiving work away from him. That's the biggest news. Todd Gurley isn't just going to tank, but Darrell Henderson's going to take receiving work away from him. McVay has come out and said multiple times now, even before the draft, that they've been looking for a receiving back, that they've been looking for it since they had Lance Dunbar. So I think one of the big ways they're going to lighten Todd Gurley's workload is he's going to lose catches. And so now, if you're looking at taking Todd Gurley at the end of first round, I just don't like it because I don't think his upside is, 350 to 400 points anymore like it used to be. I think his upside is probably, 300 to 320, right around the same place that I would put James Conner's upside. So in that case, I'm like, well, I'm going to go with Conner because I don't have to deal with, a chronic knee injury. So I think right now, though, if you're drafting Todd Gurley at the end of the second or early third, I'm on that.
Todd Gurley and the next guy on the list here, Sammy Watkins, are prime examples of something I wrote about on Twitter today. And you can follow me at Drake Fantasy. You can follow Dwayne at Dwayne McFarland, spell it DWAIN. But that's it. People in America today don't read, whether it's politics, whether it's fantasy sports. The majority of everyone wants to be told what to think. They want their cheat sheet put on a platter, and they want to be told, I'm taking this guy in this tier, and this is going to draw out my team just like this. The problem is you don't know the why, okay? There is a reason Sammy Watkins is on this list, and it's because of the Tyreek Hill situation, and also it's because Sammy Watkins has a whole lot of talent, okay? Sammy Watkins last year only played in 10 games, and he caught, 40 balls on 55 targets? So he didn't do jack shit last year. But if there's no Tyreek Hill, and you are the guy paying attention in your league, and you know this, and you can take advantage, there is huge opportunity here with Tyreek Hill being out and Sammy Watkins. Where is the upside? Where's the ceiling, Dwayne, for Mr. Watkins?
Yeah, I think for a guy like Sammy, if Tyreek Hill, I think the biggest upside scenario, right, is if for some reason Tyreek Hill was, suspended for the season. Mm-hmm. And in that case, I've got Sammy Watkins right now. I've got him projected in, I've got two scenarios here for Sammy Watkins. One is if Tyreek Hill plays, I've got him at 110 targets, 70 catches, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. In the other scenario, I have got Sammy Watkins. That was without Tyreek Hill. Sorry. Here's with Tyreek Hill. His target share drops to 17%, which drops him to 60 catches, 805 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So the thing, though, with Watkins is I am already, even in his upside number I gave you, I'm baking in injury. And we just can't predict injury. If he were to play the whole season, I think the top end, which would be what I just gave you, plus him not missing any games, I think Sammy Watkins can get up in the 250, 275 range. I mean, he's a really, really, in a full point PPR, he's way better of a player than people give him credit for. He's just one of those guys people want to dismiss now because they say, oh, well, Sammy Watkins has never done it. Well, it's because he's been hurt. When the guy's healthy, and I did some film breakdown stuff for Matt Wallman last year on Sammy Watkins early in the year. Oh, the dude, his run after the catch is still there. He can still beat players deep. Cornerbacks have to respect his speed. He's got the best quarterback in the league, arguably, and he's in the best offensive scheme in the league, arguably. So for me, Sammy Watkins, the ceiling is up in the 250, 275 range. I would say his ceiling, right, is better than Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, Cooper Kupp, because those three guys, all three of them are going to be there. They're all three going to be good. They're all really good players, but they cap each other. Right. If Watkins is just him and Kelsey as the top two, and I think Mecole Hardman, he'll play a role, but he's a rookie that just started playing receiver 2 years ago. He isn't going to come in and just kill it. He'll be put on the field for certain plays. They'll have packages for him, and he'll grow as the season goes. But it's going to be Watkins and it's going to be Kelsey as the 1 and the 2 if Tyreek Hill doesn't play.
People forget that Sammy Watkins, but the year he was traded, was going as like a wide receiver 2 in drafts. I mean, this guy was getting drafted in like the 3rd and 4th round. Now people look at him and they're like, Sammy Watkins, because he's always hurt and he hasn't really. And
I get it. So, some of it is risk profile. So if you think of the people we've named so far, right? Tyreek Hill, Todd Gurley, and Sammy Watkins. Watkins is going if Tyreek Hill and Watkins, as the news continues to come out, he's a guy that'll move down this list. If Tyreek Hill is going to be out for 4 games, Sammy Watkins is going to move down this list. At that point, I don't know that I'm taking him, in the 5th round where he goes today. But if Tyreek Hill is going to miss 8 games, if Tyreek Hill gets suspended for 10 games or a season, Sammy Watkins, his ADP is going to go up. He's going to turn into a 4. You watch, he will turn into a 4th round, if not a 3rd round pick, especially if Hill is out for the season. So this is kind of the opposite of the Tyreek Hill bet, right? You're betting on the flip side, of the coin. I've had some people ask me, would you draft both? No, because it's just too much draft capital. Mm-hmm. It's not. I don't think it's a viable strategy, because you would have to take 1 in the 5th and 1 in the 6th, or 1 in the 4th and 1 in the 5th, and I'm just, I don't think that's a good strategy. I think you put your chip on one or the other at this point in the year, and then you let things shake out and you make up for it in the back end of your draft with some other guys we'll talk about in a minute.
The ADP for this next player is going to go through the roof because it just was announced today that the Oakland Raiders are going to be on Hard Knocks. So Josh Jacobs is going to get run all over preseason. And everyone's going to see him go, oh, my God, look at this rookie. He looks so good, because Hard Knocks makes every guy look like a freaking first-round draft pick in fantasy. And Josh Jacobs is going to be showcased, and therefore you're going to see this guy start going in like the 2nd round of drafts. But you have him here in a tier with guys like Henry, Fournette, Kerryon Johnson, Sony Michel, and you like him a little bit more than all those guys.
Well, yeah. So to be clear, I have him above that tier. Right now, that's the tier he's being drafted in. What I expect is by the time the season starts, due to what you just said, right? I didn't know that was going to happen when I wrote this. That was this weekend. But due to Hard Knocks, and my thought was just once people get a load of this guy in the preseason because of his running style, he's going to have highlights all over SportsCenter because he runs people over. And it's the kind of stuff that gets on TV. Either electric guys that break huge runs or people that run the other guy over. That's who gets the replay on SportsCenter. So Josh Jacobs, he's going to have 2 or 3 plays like that in the first, second, third preseason game. People are going to go nuts. And like you said, now with Hard Knocks, it's going to be before that. But the reason Jacobs is a value right now today because you can get him in that round 3-4 turn. And to me, you're getting a back, that's going to, with Isaiah Crowell out of the way. I mean, for me, I think his floor is 250 carries, but it could be higher. I do think that Jalen Richard still will play a role. But what I like about him is I know for sure it's 2 guys.
Yeah, and right? He's not a total 0 in the passing game like a guy like Fournette.
Yes. Now, if there's one guy on this list that's in that tier that I can make an argument that you should be taking, right with Josh Jacobs, it's Leonard Fournette because Fournette, the only thing standing in his way is injury. Again, I'm not a doctor. And I read tons of stuff from doctors and I read plenty of websites around fantasy and predicting injuries. And, I think there's been a lot of advancement there. But in my opinion, it's really hard to predict injury. I don't like Leonard Fournette long-term because he's got some ankle problems that they say are degenerative. But as far as when that's going to happen, it may not be this year. It may not be next year. If Leonard Fournette plays 16 games, he's the man on his team. TJ Yeldon's gone, right? So at least with Leonard Fournette, you get a guy that's going to get the ball all the time. I'm similar with Jacobs. I do think Michelle will get passing down work. My problem with Kerryon Johnson is I don't know and I love Kerryon as a talent. Let's be clear. Elite talent, I believe. The more and more I saw him last year, I was just like, why are they even letting anyone else on the field? But he's got Theo Riddick on his team, plus CJ Anderson. So I want to see more about what's going on. Sony Michel's got a knee problem, and he's in a 3-way committee. The Patriots are always a 3-way committee. Derrick Henry, his carries came when the Titans were leading. People keep saying, oh, the splits of Derrick Henry in the last 8 games, he's going to be on pace for, 2,000 yards rushing. No, go look. The Titans were blowing people out in those games, and that's when Henry got the most work. If you go look at the games late in the season, even once people say, quote unquote, Derrick Henry took over, if you look in the games that were competitive or where they trailed, Deion Lewis was getting just as much work. So Deion Lewis is not disappearing. That's a player that honestly I should give honorable mention on this list because
if all of a sudden nothing in drafts now.
Nothing. You can get him for nothing. He's literally free. And his role really hasn't changed that much. So this is something where Derrick Henry is a situation where I think a lot of people want to believe what they want to believe. Now, I like look, I came around on Derrick Henry. Last year, how much I didn't even, I even posted some stuff where I just see him really struggling, behind the line of scrimmage, a lot of things I don't like about him. He did some things really good that I thought he cleaned up, down the stretch last year. But for me, Josh Jacobs is the guy. If you can get him in your mid to late third right now, do it because he's going to cost you. I think, like you just said, I believe he will cost a late second, possibly a mid second by the time the summer's over.
The number 6 guy on this list has a direct quote from me in this podcast in his write-up, and it's, quote, Ronald Jones stinks. And that's something I said numerous times last year on this podcast. But, hey, I'm not a guy who's afraid to go out on a limb and say a guy stinks, but I'm also not afraid to change and say when there's opportunity, there's a buying opportunity on Ronald Jones. Why can't we look at 2019 as a fresh start for Mr. Jones? And I think we absolutely can. And if he's going to get that many touches in a Bruce Arians offense, hell yeah, I'll draft Ronald Jones even after saying he stinks.
Yeah, I think the big thing for Ronald Jones is, and you've heard this from some people, is they didn't add anybody in the draft, right? They did bring in Bruce Anderson, which a lot of people like as an undrafted free agent, who you can get for basically free at the end of your draft if you really want to.
Drafted him in every
I don't know that Ronald Jones is going to be good or bad. Here's what I know. I didn't get to see Ronald Jones a lot last year. I went back and watched every carry. There's not many. And I think a big part of it was early in camp. He battled some injuries and he couldn't handle pass pro. And pass pro, he's going to have to be able to handle it in Bruce Arians' offense. So back to preseason, what you want to watch in preseason. You hear people, you can't tell anything by preseason. I've literally had people on Twitter tell me I'm stupid and you can't find out anything in preseason. This is if you're smart, yes, you can. What do you want to see from Ronald Jones? You want to see, is he picking up blitzes? That's the number one thing you want to. This guy can run. I'm telling you, this guy can run. Now, the Bucs offensive line is terrible. I watched 4 games, I think, of the Bucs just last night, just because I wanted to watch Ronald. I went and watched every Ronald Jones snap. Well, I just went ahead and watched the whole game for each one on NFL Rewind. Their offensive line is terrible. I'm not going to lie. It's really, really bad. I don't know how anyone runs the ball in that offense right now, because literally every handoff there was someone in the backfield. So there is a problem there. My thing with Ronald Jones is, though, he's still a young player. He's more explosive and elusive than Peyton Barber. If I'm going to put a chip on a back and I can get this guy in the 8th or 9th round, and he has a pathway to 250 touches. Who else can you get in the 8th or 9th round at running back that has a path that's as clear as this to potentially 250 touches? You can name some guy that, well, this guy gets hurt and then this guy's going to get him. Oh, yes, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying as of today, we don't know who the starter is here. And I think they want Ronald Jones to win the job. So for me right now, because this is another guy, when the news hits, if all of a sudden Ronald Jones starts the first preseason game, it's going to start to move up. It's going to move up. It's going to move up. And if he, God forbid, if he breaks one long run, you know how it goes, Drake. Mm-hmm. If he breaks one long run against a bunch of backups, that are playing in the second series of the first preseason game, this is a guy who, if you think about it, his situation is really similar to a lot of the guys we just talked about. Kerryon Johnson, you can even put Aaron Jones on that list. I like some of those offenses better, but from a touches standpoint, he has the upside to be where they are. His draft, the capital it's going to take to get him in a draft with one run like that, or any kind of positive news, you're just going to see it skyrocket. He'll turn into a 5th or 6th round pick. We have people taking Darrell Henderson in the 5th round. We have Miles Sanders goes in the 5th or 6th round. Who's the Chicago Bears rookie running back for whatever reason? David Montgomery. Mm-hmm. He's going in the 5th and 6th rounds. You bet your ass Ronald Jones will be going in the 5th and 6th rounds if he comes out and shows anything in the preseason. So he's a guy to buy now. You want to buy him now and get him on your team at this price, and then you may want to fade him as his price goes up.
I kind of like buying late on Peyton Barber too, just because I'm one of those
you can
cheap
do that
son
too.
of a guns. If you got a 12th, 13th round pick, that's a guy who could be splitting starter reps. So don't forget about him.
And my issue with Barber is really more, I like him.
But if
I'm gonna, and he's better than people think. I actually, he continues to beat out other start guys that get drafted higher and all that kind of stuff. I just don't see the explosiveness. Mm-hmm. And so with a guy like Jones, I think even if he finds his way into a two-way committee, I like the upside of the big play that can return value to me in the 8th round. So I think there are a lot of ways for Ronald Jones to return value on an 8th or a 9th round pick without even becoming the starter that gets 250, 260 touches. But I think his upside easily could reach that.
We talked a lot about Geronimo Allison already, so we'll kind of gloss over him. He's a guy Dwayne loves late.
Well, just real quick. Yeah, on him, though, what people have to understand is it's roster construction. Mm-hmm. Geronimo Allison, so Ronald Jones, James Washington, even we talked Todd Gurley and Tyreek Hill. Those are guys that carry more risk. Geronimo Allison is a guy that doesn't carry as much upside as those guys, but he's very likely to be the 2nd or 3rd target for Aaron Rodgers in a passing offense that's going to throw the ball a lot. As long as he's not hurt. I think I like Marquise Valdez-Scantling as well. So there's not that there's nothing to watch here, but Allison is the great kind of floor pick that if you make some of these other picks, you can turn around and take a guy like him. And that's going to help. That helps offset some of the risk you may have taken earlier. If I want to take a risk on, not Ronald Jones, but if I want to take
Miles Sanders.
Yeah, Miles Sanders. I want to take Darrell Henderson, all those sorts of guys. I can turn around and still grab a guy that can probably flex more for me play my flex role for the first few weeks. Again, it's just challenging people to think about how they're constructing their roster. You have to think multiple steps ahead of your opponent. So it's not just about drafting round to round. It's about having a plan. And these are just some of the guys I wanted to give to people that I found myself gravitating to. We'll talk about more of them as the preseason goes on.
And everybody talks about MVS like he was some big stud. He fell off a lot at the end of the season. And really when he did take off for that short stretch, it was because Allison was hurt and Valdez-Scantling moved into the slot. And by the end of the year, he was a scrub, and they even stopped going to him, and they were going to Equinemius St. Brown. But and
he was a rookie. He was a rookie, so I still like MVS. But to your point, when he was in the slot, he was the most productive. And so right now, Allison's a blocker to him playing in that role that he really likes. So for MVS, what I want to watch in the preseason, again, there are things to watch in the preseason. I want to watch, can he beat outside press coverage? You know, I do want to get a feel for, are he and Rodgers in sync? You know, is Rodgers hitting him on timing routes, like comebacks, all that kind of stuff? Allison's going to be put in a situation where it's going to be really hard for defenses, you know, to do a lot about him because he'll be operating out of the slot a lot.
The final guy on the list is someone we've touched on in the past few shows, and it's a guy I guarantee in your home leagues might not get drafted because people just forget about him, and that's Albert Wilson, the wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins. Had a couple of real big blow-up games and then got hurt kind of early mid-season. But, as Dwayne writes here, he could play that Julian Edelman role in Chad O'Shea's offense in Miami.
Yeah, and for folks that don't know Chad O'Shea, he's basically been the receivers coach of the Patriots since he was born. It's literally goes like 10 years back. It's like somebody, you're like, who is this person?
He's not the Lucky Charms leprechaun.
Exactly. But thinking about that history, right, and thinking, so he knows, you know, what he's looking for in these receivers. I think Albert Wilson is the most likely candidate right now to play that Julian Edelman Z/slot role that they'll move around, move him inside, let him run, you know, the under routes, you know, a lot of the drags, a lot of the, you know, shorter stuff. And Ryan Fitzpatrick's a pretty good quarterback about, you know, anticipating getting the ball out of his hand. We also know that if Josh Rosen does happen to win out or take over, he's a guy that prefers, you know, the timing type of passing as well. So what you got to watch with Albert Wilson is another thing. So preseason with him, what you want to see is he running all those sort of routes. Because last year, a lot of his yardage, his big plays came on bubbles and screens and, you know, little bitty dinky stuff where he did what he does. What's great about him is if he shows that he has mastery of those routes and they can get the ball to him quickly in space, and you pair that with what he showed as a run after the catch guy last year, you could have something really, really special. But that's going to be something too that I'll be monitoring through preseason is A, are they lining him up there and then moving him around? And then B, are they actually having him run real routes and not just trying to get him the ball as more like a trinket type of player? So we want to validate that. But right now, he's the guy I would put my chip on in Miami.
So that's his list. If you want to read his honorable mention guys, you can go over to fightingchancefantasy.com. We got to drive some site traffic somehow. Get people over there reading all the good stuff from Ryan Hallam and Steve Rappin and everybody over at Fighting Chance, man. That site is just growing and growing. There's baseball stuff. There's football. There's fantasy box office. There was fantasy survivors. It's a lot of fun. They're really good guys at Fighting Chance, and it's the kind of site we're happy to be a part of, and we're glad that we can be a part of that fun group and give you guys this show every week. And the show is going to be growing, folks. And next week, we just give you a little teaser. It might be the biggest show we do to date, as we have a guest who I think people may have heard of. He's on some startup site. Who's this kid?
I don't know. Do we want to jinx it?
We'll just leave it at that.
His initials are SB.
There you go.
We'll leave it at that. We'll let people see.
Because in case our equipment screws up like it enjoys doing, and then all of a sudden we have this big show planned and we can't do jack squat. But anything else, Dwayne, as we get out of here?
Yeah, one last thing. So, you know, as people are thinking about drafting, one other thing I did last week, and I've had several of my buddies and different people ask me this over the last couple of years. Hey, would you just put something like this together? for us. And so I decided to finally just put it all down on paper. I did another article, I think last Friday or Thursday, and it's called Drafting Like a Pro, Not a Joe.
Excellent article.
Or a Jerry, and that's a play, against Jerry Jones, and I've got the Jimmy Johnson, Jerry Jones press conference where they're breaking up picture. But anyway, what it does, and I'll be following this up with another article or two, it breaks down really how good of a fantasy player are you? And so I've broken down the first 3 levels of basically a spectrum so that you can help kind of grade yourself on where you are. And really what this is based off of, I've done, over 250, 300 mid-stake, high-stake drafts over the last 10 years with some of the best people in the industry that won a ton of money doing this. I've had some success, quite a bit of success myself, but really what this is about the things I've learned, the things that I've created, and, just assimilating what I've seen some of these really other consistent great players do in their game. And this is something, honestly, that, I could write a whole book on this, and, it's something that people should. I think there's really, really valuable information, but this gives you the basics of it and allows you to grade yourself. You can put yourself on the spectrum as to where you are, and then you can start to think, okay, I think I'm already at level 2. What do I need to do to get to level 3? And, level 3 actually ties perfectly into this podcast tonight because it's talking about being 4, 5, 6 steps ahead of your competition in a draft. First thing you got to do is be organized and just ready to draft. It's like I give the analysis of it's a poker hand, right? You got to know what you have in your hand and how good is it. The next level, if it's a poker analogy, is what do you put your opponent on? And what that means is you're fully aware of everything going on in the draft, and you're able to calculate, if I take player A, how likely am I to still get player B, et cetera, et cetera. What are the best ways you may actually have one guy ranked above another, but in the draft, your decision may actually be to take the other guy, your guy that's ranked lower, because you have the best chance of getting both, right? So little things like that. But this level 3 component, read this, and then you can come back and listen to this podcast again as we break down some of the guys that should be part of your later round strategy. And as the draft unfolds, you start to see, based on the way your first 4 or 5 rounds go, what you need to prioritize late. And you're going to be more prepared. What goes where. If you built a really safe offense in the first 5 rounds, you're going to want to go for more upside. If you took, on, like Brian said earlier, Miles Sanders, you decided you wanted to take him in the 5th or Darrell Henderson in the 5th, you'll hear a lot of people on Twitter, that's just too early. Maybe it is, but there are strategies to where you can build a roster and still do that. You can take those guys there and then turn around and make up for it, in the rounds later. So really these 2 articles were meant to play off of one another, the ADP article and then, looking at, the first 3 levels. So something that you can go give a read, like Brian said, at fightingchancefantasy.com. And you can just look under Dwayne McFarland. You can look under all the stuff I've written. I think it'll be like the second thing listed there.
And we're going to have a whole show come July of Dwayne's draft plan. Don't worry about that, folks. And we'll make sure you know everything you need to know about who Dwayne wants to draft, because I am taking copious notes over here to make sure that I collect trophies, belts, and cash this season. This may be the quickest show we've done. We just went over an hour and
this year.
2 minutes. Ever.
Yeah.
Who knows? But
I don't know if ever, but maybe. It might be. It might be. Yeah, no, this is a great show.
Nothing wrong with that. And we want to thank our guest, Matt Williamson. Follow him at Williamson NFL, the Locked On NFL podcast, which Dwayne did an awesome job on the other day. You can follow Dwayne at Dwayne McFarland and read his work over at fightingchancefantasy.com and soon to be footballguys.com. And you can check me out at Drake Fantasy. Folks, crack a beer, say goodnight. We'll see you.
This has been the Tuesday Night Hustle. We're back next week with all you need for waiver wire, trades, roster management, and more. Until then, never get out hustled.